Yo, what is up guys, Grim here, and in today's video I thought I'd give you guys a bit of an idea of what to expect from the up-and-coming Chris Wilson interview that I'll be conducting with Ghazzy TV and Crouching Tuna tomorrow on Ghazzy's channel. If you're interested on a countdown timer and a link to Ghazzy's channel, check down below so you can tune in live. But overall, I kind of wanted to give you guys an idea of the process of making the interview questions, how we sourced them, and basically the full thing. And also expose kind of what happened behind the scenes with like everything. And then also talk a little bit about what you can expect from the topic list and give you guys a bit of context on how we arrived at those topics. So the first thing I want to cover here is, of course, the topics as well as the kind of process of having them approved by GGG and why that was important. So let's talk about how we gathered them. So primarily the way these questions were created was that me and Ghazzy and Tuna reached out to our communities. We asked for questions from them and we received a massive amount. And I want to thank everyone who submitted questions to me. You know, a lot of people spent a lot of time on their questions. I read them all. I didn't have a chance to respond to everyone as a lot of these were, you know, thousands, like 1,000+ word kind of Google Docs, which, you know, people were writing up. And I had literally hundreds of these to go through. I was getting many Discord messages, so I really do appreciate that. I'm sorry I couldn't reply to everybody immediately, but I did read it all, and I do have all of that, and I make sure I have that in my mind, and it was in my mind when I was creating my topics, which were going to be submitted to the group. So everyone has been heard, and I've tried to make sure that everyone's questions should eventually be answered or kind of like mentioned. And if they're not, we can try and get those through in another way, shape, or form if you still feel they aren't answered. All right, so step one was gathering all the questions from the community, and then we had to bring them together and spend many hours, you know, kind of sifting through them and then compressing them all into topics which could actually be discussed. And this is actually pretty damn hard because we are, unlike the other two podcasts, not going for a question and answer style. That's been done twice now. It's been really good. A lot of the questions have been answered, you know, very like kind of like shallowly, like, you know, for example, can we expect more chase uniques? Yes. Next question. That's kind of like how it was answered. But the goal of our podcast is to go way deeper. We want to spend 10 to 15 minutes on every topic and question and answer and, you know, kind of really dig deep, have opportunities to kind of go back at GGG if they don't have, they haven't explained it well enough and stuff like that. It's very important that we kind of have the opportunity to do so. So we had to compress this community kind of questions all into like, you know, 15 or 20 topics, which was very difficult. We feel like we've done a pretty good job and there's a lot to talk about. And we're kind of touching on that in a second here, but that was step number one. So step number two was taking that topic list, going back to the community and getting a bunch of feedback on it, which was really good. And, you know, overall, I think that was a pretty good process. We learned a lot, and then we kind of reiterated, and we did this a few times to make sure that we got to a place where we were happy with and the community were happy with. And after that, you know, we grabbed that topic list and we shipped it off to GGG to get approval. Now, part of this approval process was spending many hours in calls with Bex. We spent a few hours in a call with Chris. And that was really interesting. But, you know, all of it, there was a lot of effort put into this interview on both sides. Fingers crossed it turns out well. But yeah, part of that was kind of rewording some of the questions, regearing some of them, making sure that they were all feasible to answer. And we were going to get good answers because we don't want to get up there and have Chris say he can't talk about something or he just says no and we move on. That's not what we're going for. We're going for really deep and meaningful discussion. So we need to make sure all the topics were available to talk about, and that's why we did that. So yeah, after many hours and many calls, we feel like we've gotten to a position where we're happy with it, and we do have a final topic list, which is super duper, really lean, but it has really good discussion topics on it, and we're going to actually have a proper talk about what GGG thinks about these topics. So that's kind of the idea behind that. So that was the process in kind of coming all the way through and making sure that we have our questions. It's really important to say that nothing was off the table. We always had the opportunity to ask whatever we wanted. But the kind of caveat is that, you know, we might not always get the answers we wanted. And that kind of sucks. And we didn't want to have anything on there which had already been asked or which wasn't going to get a really good answer or meaningful discussion. So that's kind of the direction we went in, and we really are happy with where we are at now. Hopefully at the end of the day, everyone's happy, but if they're not, you know, we'll try and follow up and see if we can get the answers another way. All right. So the next one we want to talk about here is, the audience. So of course we went into this. The pitch was to Bex that can we do a soft core trade podcast here? That was what we asked. And we really, really wanted to kind of target that specific community, as it's the community that myself, Ghazzy, and Crouching Tuna all represent. And that was the goal from the very, very get-go. So if you're a softcore trade kind of community member, you should feel like a lot of these questions resonate with you. But I apologize if you're not an SSF, or if you're a hardcore player. Some of these might be a little bit niche and not to apply to you, but that was the intention from the beginning. So if there's any sort of request or need for additional podcast, I'm sure that they GGG will be happy to fill that kind of request, and maybe that community can also get a podcast of their own. But be under no impression that this is meant to be a podcast for answering all the questions. It's definitely very, very kind of like focused on the softcore trade kind of community and that style of play. All right. The next point I want to talk about here is that there's going to be a lot of endgame related questions. So there's going to be discussion about endgame crafting systems and basically accessibility to those. There's going to be discussion about endgame systems in general, stuff like the kind of like hardest content in the game and some of the medium stuff, and like what we can expect from the Atlas and 3.17 and stuff like that. So it's very, very important to note that this is definitely targeted at the kind of like the higher end of things. But chances are, if you're watching this video, or if you browse the subreddit, or if you're watching the podcast or the interview yourself, chances are you're that kind of a player anyway, as you already engage in some of the higher end kind of content online about the game. So those are the kind of like the disclaimers out of the way. And let's get into the actual topics themselves. So you guys kind of have a bit of context and a bit of backstory on a lot of these things. I just want to say this isn't going to be everything we're going to be talking about. And as I mentioned, we want to have a discussion format. So it's entirely possible that some of these don't get covered, some of them get covered, and some of the things that aren't on here get covered in way, way more detail. And again, this isn't everything that's on the list. It's just a few things that I wanted to touch on to give you guys an idea of what we're going to be talking about and give you guys a bit of backstory. All right, so let's get into it. So the first thing we're going to be talking about is hard mode. Now, originally I asked that Chris actually not talk about hard mode at all, and I asked that he not use hard mode in any of the examples, as it feels a little bit disconnected, and a lot of the community from the softcore side of things always feel like that it's not for them. And this is meant to be the podcast for the softcore trade guys. And he explained to me that that was going to be quite difficult, and that spawned an interesting discussion around the purpose of hard mode and how it's currently not been marketed correctly from their perspective. Now, from what I understand, and we're going to hear straight from Chris's mouth, I'm sure tomorrow, is that hard mode is intended to be a testing ground. It's almost like a PTR in terms of its functionality. Basically, anything that they're not sure about, or any really, really big and disruptive change to the game that they want to make, whether that's to loot, whether that's to like flasks, whether that's to anything in the game, they're going to try that out in hard mode first and gather feedback and assess whether it's right for the core game. So essentially, they're finally potentially implementing a PTR kind of scenario in which players can test the game and the future changes of the game, and that's the purpose, the real purpose behind hard mode, and why it's so relevant to softcore trade, and why it keeps getting referenced in all of these discussions about like loot and chase items and all sorts of stuff like that. So that's going to be the first topic. It's funny because I didn't want it at all, but now it's a big topic. But yeah, pretty interesting, and it's fair to say the reaction from all of us was quite a shock. All right, next thing we're going to be talking about here is items. So items is a massive topic. There's going to be a lot of discussion. Again, each of these topics, as well as more, we're hoping to spend 10 to 15 minutes or more on each of them and really deep dive on them. So the first thing is we want to talk about is the ideal item system for PoE, what that looks like, how we're going to get there, potentially like what they think of the current system, what are the big flaws of it, etc. We're going to talk all about that. We're going to ask for their thoughts on the current crafting system, why certain things are the way they are, what they think is too weak, what they think is too powerful, what they learnt from each of the crafting system. A good point, one of the things I'm really interested in, and one of the questions I really want to kind of touch on, is what they learnt from Harvest. So a lot of people have been tackling the Harvest kind of topic as, like, are we ever seeing Harvest come back? Are we ever seeing deterministic crafting come back? Well, I think it's important to understand what they learnt from it, as Harvest was originally intended as an experiment for Path of Exile 2. So it's really going to be interesting to hear which parts of Harvest they liked, which parts of they didn't, and which what they might come back with in the future for their crafting systems, because it's clear to see that GGG is still experimenting with crafting, and there's going to be a lot to talk about here, and kind of understand, what they're happy with, what they're not happy with, and what we can expect to change in the future. All right, we're going to be talking about accessibility of all endgame systems in the game and whether they're happy with it. So, that's stuff like crafting, trading, endgame content, the bosses, all sorts of stuff like that. That's all on the table, and it will be discussed. And then we're also going to be talking about item progression and brick walls that a lot of people are running into and or not running into with certain skills and builds. So, if you've ever gotten to the point where you feel like you can't make upgrades again, this is a topic for you. Very, very important there. And we're also going to touch on target farming. So those are the big, kind of broad strokes of the things we want to talk about. There's tons here. There's tons more on the list. But I kind of wanted to give you guys an idea of what we'll be discussing. And those are really, really big, meaty topics, which are going to have lots of little tangents come off them and lots of opportunities to talk about lots of different things as well, based on the responses that we hear from Chris. Each of the streamers, which are going to be on there, are going to have tons of little notes that they have for each of the questions and the topics that we're going to be talking about. So expect lots of discussion and lots of really, really good stuff to come in from people chiming in and really, really digging deep into all of this stuff like that, because it's going to be really, really important. But yeah, fair to say we should have a pretty damn good idea of what Chris's ideal item system is, whether he's happy with the crafting system and item acquisition in the game, and also what he thinks of the current progression system. As someone who's touted SSF as the ideal way to play, it'd be interested to see if any of that thought process is going to make its way into Trade League in the future, and I'm pretty interested to see what he has to say. Next up, we have skills and balance. So there's two primary things that we want to talk about here, and that is the acts plus early game balance, whether they're happy with it, and that's going to extend into a number of different topics and subtopics. One of the more interesting ones I'm passionate about is early skill gem balance and the inability to play anything but leveling builds right now. I think it's going to be really interesting to talk about and kind of hear his opinion on. And we're also going to be talking about skill gem creation, nerfs, and buffs, and the process behind them, and kind of whether they're happy with them, how a skill is identified for a nerf, what the nerfs are going to be, and kind of like what their philosophy on skill balance is, and why we can see skills like Blade Vortex kind of end up the way they are, and then skills like Spectral Shield Throw end up the way they are, and kind of like why they don't do more of this kind of stuff like that, and kind of like do it in a targeted way, as opposed to the support gem massacre that we saw this league. So there's going to be a lot of interesting discussion here, and if you're anyone who's interested in like the meta, the skill gem meta, understanding whether you're going to get buffs in the future and all sorts of stuff like that, this is the topic for you. And this one was spawned from talking to a number of people who are saying there's not enough variety, there's not enough diversity, they're unhappy with their builds getting nerfed, all sorts of stuff like that. That's all going to be tackled here. All right. And the last one I want to talk about here and touch on, again, to reiterate, this isn't the whole topic list. I got to keep saying that because someone's going to be like, they're not asking my question. Everything was considered. Make sure that, you tune in to make sure that we do cover what you, to make sure that you understand what we're covering. So the next one we're going to be talking about is aspirational content. So this one is a big topic here for the softcore trade community, especially the high-end one. And this essentially is going to encompass everyone who's made it to the Endgame Atlas. So if you're in red maps, this is your kind of area. You're going to get excited here. So the first question, which we really want to talk about, and the kind of topic we want to talk about, is the Atlas itself. So obviously we've spent like 2 years on Conquerors of the Atlas. Lots of people are dissatisfied. Lots of people are happy with some things. We want to understand what worked and what didn't from the perspective of GGG, and then also understand, why things are the way they are. We're going to get into stuff like, map sustain, being able to run one map, loot, elite mechanic bloat. All of this stuff is going to be discussed and tackled in this kind of discussion, and there's going to be lots of little tangents as well talking about that. So the Conquerors of the Atlas, what have they learned from it, and what we can expect from 3.17 and their learnings from that, and kind of understand what the future of the endgame might look like for PoE. Very, very important. All right, the next one is going to be friction in Path of Exile. So this is everything from trading to, like the Conquerors having so many things like, that you need to kind of tackle through and the RNG and all sorts of stuff like that. We want to understand what their philosophy is on friction. We want to understand why it is so necessary in the game and why you need all of these little things and why you can't make harvest tradable and all sorts of stuff like that. Friction in the game, very, very important topic. Why there's not going to be an auction house, I'm sure that's going to come up, and all sorts of stuff like that. that's basically a massive topic, and it's one of the biggest pain points for a lot of people, because if there was no friction, you could run stuff like Delve endlessly, you could run stuff like 5 Orb Delirium endlessly, you could do basically any content you wanted, and that's what we're going to tackle here with this topic. Okay, this one kind of segues off that, and that is content for players that want to min-max a character. So if you've ever gotten bored with Path of Exile, or felt like you finished the game, or you ran out of things to do, this is the topic for you. We want to understand what their perspective is on that thing. And a bit of an interesting endgame backstory here. Is that when we were discussing this, currently a lot of the systems that were considered the end game, like Deep Delve, 5 Orb Delirium, these were actually unintended, and they weren't designed to be functioning that way. And when we were talking to the devs to approve these questions, it was very, very interesting to get their just little kind of like surface level insight on this. And the end result was is that they've never actually had a crack at designing endgame content for the ultimate endgame player, the player that gets bored with doing the invitation, stuff like that. So it's fair to say that this audience is a fairly new audience. It's a fairly niche audience, but it'll be pretty interesting to hear if there's any sort of kind of plans to make content or include a little bit of content for players who are kind of a little bit like outside of the normal kind of content loop. Lots of people are pretty happy with the kind of content in Path of Exile. You know, people were, clearing Cirrus, trying to get to Maven, and all sorts of stuff like that. But what about the players who just kind of get there really, really early? The outliers. It'll be interesting to hear if they've got any sort of stuff in lined up for that. And that's going to be this question here. The next one is going to be stuff like leaderboards and like stuff like guilds and all sorts of stuff like that. Content within the game, kind of meta content. So we're going to be talking stuff like ladder boards for people who like delving, speedrunning, first boss kill kind of awards, like which shows up in the chat, or like you can get some sort of a badge or something like that. The lab ladder coming back, whether or not we can see some stuff for guilds and how that kind of fits into guild hideouts. Maybe there's some ability to kind of like do kind of like guild versus guild or something like that. I don't know. All sorts of stuff like that. Content which isn't directly in the game loop, and stuff that can kind of like be kind of like almost like meta, and stuff that really, really resonates with the kind of community side of things, which will be pretty interesting to hear about. So overall, the kind of topic list is obviously far more extensive than this. There's topics within topics, but that's kind of broad strokes, some of the big things that we want to tackle and things that I wanted to make you aware of. There was a lot of talk about these and kind of whether GGG should be able to answer these. And from what I understand, they're going to have answers for all of these, or we're going to get a philosophical discussion around this kind of stuff. I have no guarantees on any of this stuff, but this is all just my understanding of how it is right now. Many, many hours were put in to talk about this stuff and construct a list. But again, want to reiterate, we've got a very, very in-depth topic list with very, very specific questions and lots of stuff there. So don't worry, this isn't the topic list. This is just to give you guys an idea. So overall, how am I feeling? I'm feeling pretty confident that we're going to definitely address some of the bigger issues in the game and the future of the game. I feel like a lot of people are hopefully going to be pretty excited after the podcast as they're going to talk about some exciting stuff and kind of like identify that there's quite a few issues there. There will also probably be a few questions from Chris, I imagine, from their perspective, to hopefully get a little bit more context of some of these issues. So overall, I'm pretty excited, and hopefully you guys are too. This video was obviously kind of just like a bit slapdash, but yeah, overall, pretty keen. Hopefully you guys are excited, and I'll see you guys tomorrow on Ghazzy's stream for the interview. Hopefully it goes well. And with all that said, see you guys in the next one. Cheers.